looked at the title of the talk, Social Networking and Networking Technologies, What's Emerging from Pandora's Urn. And what we heard was some cool introductions from Dr. Livingstone and from Dave. And Dr. Livingstone said that we're going to pick up some academic and then we need to apply it, that's one of the success stories of their business school here. So I'm going to actually bridge off of that. We're going to cover a little academic and then we're going to try to apply it. Because what I want to do for you is set the stage so you have a way to listen to the stories you're going to hear from Marcy, Virginia, and Jim. So I don't have a case study for you. I'm not going to tell you how I've done knowledge management with the corporations that I've worked with or the groups that I've worked with. What I want to do is give us a context to be able to peel apart that title. So when I look at that title, hello. When I look at that title, a lot of terms came to me there. I see Pandora's box. What the heck's a Pandora's box? I see networking technologies. I see knowledge management. I'm thinking, what in the world's all that about? So when I see the word networking technology, I know, okay, technology. We know technology never follows a linear path. It follows an exponential path. It's explained by things like Moore's law and the singularity. So I know right off the bat, one of the issues that we're probably dealing with is the fact that we view the world linearly, but it's taking off exponentially. And so we're probably making an underhanded prediction of what's really going to happen. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute. Pandora's box. That's a metaphor for a situation that will cause great grief. What, do we have great grief here because technology is taking off? What is the great grief? What does it have to do with knowledge management? Are we worried about the explicit knowledge that's very stable? Or are we worried about the tacit knowledge that's very volatile? Which knowledge are we worried about with this networking technology? Where's the social part of that? What are we worried about? Are we worried because maybe new paths will open up for knowledge sharing? Well, what can happen on those new paths? So if we think of the metaphor, Rome, one of their successes during their glory years was they built a ton of roads that led out from Rome so that they could go conquer the world. Well, there was the same roads that their enemies came in and took them over on. So which one are we worried about? Are we worried about the spread, knowledge growth, or are we worried about knowledge loss? Somebody up there said, hey, enough of this. I want to hear about how it ties to the business case. So absolutely. We are here at a knowledge management conference, and I am going to talk about it in the knowledge management sphere, not in the entire business management sphere. But we can't lose sight of that business sphere. So we want to look at, I guess this all has something to do with our ability to gain market share. It's going to have something to do with the attitude of the people who work with us, and the people for whom we're working, our stakeholders, our collaborators, our customers, our competitors. Because when it's all said and done, we want to know what the heck are we going to do with all this, so we need a strategy. And as we're going to hear from Marcy later, that strategy has to work within a given culture, or it has to perhaps create a different culture. So we mentioned the word culture. And so if we're going to work that way, we heard about storytelling. Well, what's cool is that's exactly the approach I want to do. So I want to go from the storytelling to the business side of it, which is the strategizing. And in order to do that, we're going to go from a myth and see if that myth can become a metaphor for how to strategize. And so in order we strategize, we know that anytime we do strategy development, is the first thing we have to do is take a look at the world around us from various dimensions. We just can't take it from one dimension. That's very, very dangerous. And so we're going to interrogate the issue. So I'm going to walk us from groundswells to tipping points, from ancient Greeks to modern geeks. That's the journey we're going to take here this morning. Everybody good for that? Everybody good? And so when it's all done, I want us to be able to look at perhaps how we manage our social net for your working knowledge. Notice I flipped the words around a little bit. And so I want us to be able to look at that because ultimately knowledge only exists one place. Where? In the heads. Okay? And so if we lose sight of that, as Dave said, we're in big trouble. So let's start out with a story. I figured let's use the story that's the theme of the conference. And heck, this story is 3,000 years old. So if a story is good at passing along knowledge, imagine how good a 3,000-year-old story must be. Everybody ready for a story?
Yes.
Okay. Long time ago, beginning of time, we have a very powerful god. His name is Zeus. Okay? Now Zeus is a pretty cool guy. He's setting things in motion. And I guess because he's always carrying around a lightning bolt, he has some anger management issues. Okay? And so Zeus had this thing where he put all these creatures on the planet, and he had two Titan brothers go down and give those creatures gifts so they could do stuff. The Titan brothers are Epimetheus and Prometheus. Now Epimetheus, he got his name, it stands for hindsight. Not as in I learned from my past, but as I'm running forward while looking backwards. It wasn't a complimentary term. The other brother's Prometheus. His name basically means looking forward. And so what we basically have is the two brothers, one who acts in the moment and the other who acts with vision. Alright? So Epimetheus, he's busy giving around the gifts to all the animals. When he gets to man, he's kind of run a little short because, well, he has no foresight. Okay, so he didn't plan ahead. Prometheus gives man a gift. He takes it from the gods. And he takes the gift of the ability to make fire. Now that's some cool tacit knowledge. And if you're a Titan, it's easy to pass on tacit knowledge. You just pull it out and you stick it in their head. And so it was pretty cool. So he passed on the knowledge on how to start fire. What he didn't realize was that was going to tick off Mr. Anger Management. Okay? And so he punishes Prometheus, and that's a whole other story about how Prometheus is being punished. But Zeus doesn't stop there because he's got this anger issue. So he says, I'm going to punish even man. Man just sitting there like, hey, what am I doing this for? I'm just sitting down here getting the gifts. So he says, I'm going to make something to punish man. So he calls up his buddies, and Zeus is already a modern worker. He believes in collaboration. And so he first calls up Hermes. Hermes leads the design team. And they have Hephaestus mold a creature. Then Hermes says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give this creature the ability to speak. Not just speak as in phonetics. I'm going to be able to give this person, this creature, the ability to sort of be deceitful and be guileful. So he's given this creature a whole nother bag of tricks. Then Athena comes along. You know Athena, she's very gorgeous. And she gives the creature killer fashion sense. All right, clothes her out, tells you dress like this, you're going to knock out the world. Then she calls in Aphrodite. Aphrodite, the sex god, okay? What do you think she's going to give the creature? So she gives the creature killer sex appeal. All righty? And killer is the operative adjective there, okay? And so then Hermes looks at the whole package. He says, that's looking pretty good. He names the package Pandora, the receiver of many gifts. And since received them, I have the many gifts. Pandora, many gifts. All right? A few other creatures come along, and they add to the package. They adorn Pandora, and so Pandora comes along. Zeus says, cool creation. I'm going to give Pandora, in essence, a dowry. So he puts a bunch of stuff in a container, and he gives it to Pandora. And he says, all righty, go at it. So they're on their way. Meanwhile, down in the other world, Prometheus has told Epimetheus, by the way, don't ever accept anything Zeus gives you. It's bad news. Alright? So there's our poor Epimetheus. He's hanging out one day, and along comes Stroll, and Hermes, he's delivering Pandora. What do you think Epimetheus does when he sees the most beautiful woman, filled with guile, dressed to the hilt? He falls in love, right? And so he falls in love with Pandora, despite the fact of what Zeus warned about. Now at this point we kind of know. Pandora is carrying a container. What is it? We think it's a box. Unfortunately, we're speaking English, so we're using the wrong word. And so she is not carrying a box. She's carrying an urn. It's a pithos in Greek, okay? And I like that metaphor better because that's a non-linear shape. It has very different shape than a box, okay? She's carrying it. So, Pandora, Epimetheus, who knows how they're happily living along, but for some reason one day, Pandora, out of no maliciousness, her curiosity gets the best of her, and what does she do? What does she do? She opens it up, okay? And so, what happens when she opens the urn? All the miseries of the world escape. Despair, sickness, poverty, they all come out. Pandora opens up, uh-oh, she slams the lid back on. And as we can see, when she slams the lid back on, one thing is left inside. What's left inside the urn?
Hope.
Hope, very good. We have our Greek mythologist here. We have hope left inside the urn. So what's the theme of today's conference? What's emerging from Pandora's box? What should we also be talking about? What's left in Pandora's urn, okay? And so our theme today at this, we came here to learn, okay? And so we all logged onto the website. When you read the website, it had 4 learning objectives to it, right? What were those learning objectives? That we would learn the impact that social networking has on our firm KM's efforts. We'd learn how the technologies can impact our culture. We'd learn how strategies for embracing technologies for knowledge flow. So I look at those and they're all coming at me, like Pandora at Epimetheus. So I'm thinking, well, gee whiz, okay, that's important because that's half of the story. The other story is, well, shouldn't I be taking a look at this from a Promethean standpoint? And so I'd like to look at the impact that our KM efforts can make with social networking technologies. And I think when you're going to hear Virginia and Jim talk, you're going to see what happens there. You're going to see how your firm's culture can capitalize on social networking technologies. And when you listen to Marcia today, she's going to talk about how her strategies and her culture work hand in hand, how they work with each other. And I'm not real big on embracing technologies, but I am big on embracing people. So, as Dave mentioned, let's not forget that the knowledge exists in the people's heads. We don't want to be embracing wires and bandwidth. We want to be embracing the knowledge owners. And that's where we should be leading. And so what I'd like to do is when we look at those 3 top bullets in 2 different dimensions, I think we'll open up more opportunities. So the new opportunities that we'll have to use social networking will be a lot bigger. Everybody good for that? So, what the heck's emerging from Pandora's urn that I'm so worried about? It's pretty drastic when you read the Greek then. Is that really what's happening? Am I worried about that? So I looked at a couple sources. First, I already gave you the clue to the one source. Anytime we have technology, we know that the advance of technology may actually exceed our ability to digest it. It always exceeds our ability to predict it. We're always unpredicting it, because we look out straight line, it's going up exponentially. So we know we already have that one. I'm going to touch on a book called Groundswell. How many folks have read Groundswell? Okay, all right, I'll try to back off, but basically it's a bestseller book, and it really talks about some of the effects of and the impacts of the social networking technology. So I'm going to hit a few highlights of that. And that essentially says that because of some of these technologies, it allows a groundswell which gives people leverage on big corporations that individuals did not have before. And the last one is sort of the idea we talked about, and the woman in the back who talked about all the Twitter comments. 500 of them, you look through, 5 of them looked okay. Well, what we have now is the ability to dump our brains out and get it published that didn't maybe exist that long ago. That before, if you wanted your message to get out, you wrote it down, so you kind of proofread yourself a little bit. It usually went through someone else in the organization. And so what we have with the new technology is the ability to send out a lot of unfiltered, quick type of thinking. So maybe that's what's emerging from the box. Everybody good? Those are my 3 ideas of what's emerging from Pandora's urn. Everybody disagree with those? Are looking good? So let's step back and see what the authors Charlene Lee and Josh Burnoff have to say about Groundswell. And they give us 3 stories that I think these 3 stories sort of paint a picture of what might be emerging from the urn. The first story he talks about is there's a website called Dig, which looks around the web for all the most popular blogging stories. So one day, when it did it, it came up with that a lot of people were blogging and talking about the fact that the code, the validation code for DVD encryption got published. That's it, okay? And so they kind of reported on it, and the owner of Dig got in trouble, then he thought about shutting it down, and he thought, no, I don't want to shut it down. Well, what happened? Just in that little turmoil, it made it spread even more. And so what we have is the question here is this an information management issue or a knowledge management issue? If it's an information management issue, then probably it's only touching on explicit knowledge, and that is only part of the equation. So we have to decide as we go and strategize in the future, are we talking about an explicit or a tacit? Are we talking about information or knowledge? So that's the first part. Next story in there, I like this one because, well, it happens right here on the Malibu coast. Talked about that somebody was putting together a website and have a big virtual journey. You could go up and down the California coast on your computer. Well, Barbara Streisand found out her home happens to be in the view. So she tries to shut it down. In trying to shut it down, everybody says, I'm going to get a picture of Barbara Streisand's house. So she got the opposite effect. So for those of us who touch on learning organization systems thinking, and Virginia, I believe, is going to touch on that later today, what we see is a phenomenon that Dr. Senge calls a fix that backfires. She got exactly the opposite result of what she wanted. Instead of shutting down people seeing her house, now even more people see her house. And it's now called the Streisand effect. So kind of wonder, is the Streisand effect one of the things that's emerging from the urn, or have we always had that? So that's a question that should be going through our head. The last one is, hey, you never know what's going to be published about your company. And so there's a story in there that if you do a search, Comcast on YouTube, you don't get an instructional video, you get a video about a technician who fell asleep waiting for his own help people to answer his question, and he fell asleep on some guy's sofa. So I find it kind of interesting. I read the story in the book. The book's a couple years old. I did this search last week, and doggone if it's not still the top hit, okay? That you'd think Comcast would have at least replaced it with a funny video with a keyword Comcast or something. And so what it does tell you is that your business image is at the whim of this unfiltered stuff going out at a very broad reach. My question to you, is that a knowledge management issue or a business issue? Did Comcast lose any knowledge on this? Did they get any knowledge on this? My guess is they learned something about their system. They're smarter, they're not dumber. So yeah, this is a big marketing problem, but is it a knowledge management problem? So those are three stories. And my question is, okay, when we look at that, that's the sociological system effect. What's happening person to person on social networking sites? Does anybody know what the overwhelming use of social networking sites is? We actually heard the answer this morning. I got this source, just in case you see, I got this from a study just done in the last year by Harvard Business School. What do people really do online? They look at pictures. Hey, well that's cool. Picture's worth 1,000 words. That's got to be a lot of knowledge. What pictures are they looking at? They're doing the same thing Epimetheus did. The biggest use of social networking sites is guys looking at pictures of women they don't know. So you say, come on, Paul, give me a break. All right, that's just a misnomer. What's the second one? The second biggest use is guys looking at women of pictures they do know. So, is that a knowledge management problem? I don't know. Just, come on, Paul, we know there's a lot of shopping happening here, and yeah, there is. And so the question is, from the business aspect, is it influencing purchases? So another business school study. Sure enough, it does influence purchases. For about half the people who see stuff, they're like, who cares, you know? You just bought a Hummer, I don't care. But 40%, oh, you bought a Hummer? I'm buying a Hummer. And 12% will do the opposite. You just bought a Hummer? I'm buying a Prius. Okay? And so there is some effect there. So we know there's a business reason and a business tie here. And so that's cool. Actually, interestingly enough, while I was preparing this talk just last week, USA Today runs the same thing. It says, what are people doing? Social media as a shopping tool. And I know it's a little small, but basically the top, the big 2/3 answer is they're looking for coupons. All right. The second biggest use, almost half of them are just trying to figure out what to buy, browsing products. But you do have a knowledge transfer part because they are reading reviews and watching some instructional videos. And so, okay, there is something there on what's emerging from the box. So now we've looked at the system effect, the psychological effect. So now we got to ask ourselves, social networking, what did it happen before we had the technology that we have now? Did it even exist as a commodity? So I'm going to call that, was there social networking with primitive technology? Well, the cool thing is we have a cool reference on that. That reference is a book researched by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point. That is all about this networking effect, right? Who was at the tipping point? Very good. It's about gaining the ability for a few people to make a big difference. It's the same thing we saw in Groundswell. Individuals leverage over corporations. Tipping point. that Gladwell says, hey, you get a couple of the key people, mavens or connectors or salesmen, and they are going to be able to tip the scale and make things happen. And he's got stories that go all the way back to Paul Revere. I don't think Revere was twittering, all right? So we know that there was a psychological effect already there. Here's another part. There's some primitive technology. When you call that a groundswell, an Amber Alert? The book in Groundswell talks about using texting in stadiums so that all the spectators can also be kind of like partial security guards. Well, this turns an entire highway into cops looking for a gray dye pretty primitive technology, but you get a groundswell out of it. So the cool thing is, as we do our strategizing, let's not lose sight of some of the power we had. The other part is, and give credit to Charlene Lee and Josh Burnoff in their book, they said, we'll tell you why people are motivated to go to the groundswell. So right from their very book, they hit on some pretty basic stuff. And these are the reasons they say folks are driven to the groundswell. And I'll offer to you right now, these are the same reasons Dave talked about earlier, why you want to do most anything. Dave says, don't forget, let's focus back on the basics, and I'm going to piggyback on that 100%. Because it really comes down to what's going to make somebody do something. And these authors said, you know what you want to do it? You want to be able to do certain things fundamentally as a person in a community. You want to be able to, I'm going to write these down so we can watch it for the rest of the day. You want to be able to connect. You want to be able to create. You want to be able to contribute. And that's what's going to motivate you. And that's what's motivating the folks who are in the enterprises with you and the organizations with you. When you pull these together, we tend to use the word collaborate. And what's going to be cool is our cleanup hitter today, Jim Everard, his talk, I believe, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, where is Jim? Is about collaboration, correct? And what we're going to see, when we're listening to that, say, gee whiz, how did Jim manage to be able to tap with social networking technologies the ability to allow people to better connect? We understand that one, that's not lovely, but better create and better contribute. And so it's got to hit on all the triggers. So we see that these things always existed. We always wanted to be able to get along with each other, the affinity impulse. And I love the way they phrase them as impulses. We also see the Epimethean impulses there, okay? The Purian impulse. And so what we want to do is take a look at social networking technologies and really, what are they doing in knowledge management that can tap on these fundamental emotions? And so while our question was what's emerging from Pandora's box, I really, really think we'll go a lot further when we figure out what to do with the hope left in Pandora's urn. And when we want to figure out what do, we develop a strategy, okay? And so let's talk about how would I go about doing a strategy. So first let's do a little assessment, all right? I work with a lot of military people, so they're always doing, I think it's abbreviated SA, situational awareness, okay? So let's do that. What's the knowledge at risk? What's the knowledge at risk? Comes in two flavors. We got explicit knowledge. What's the risk of explicit knowledge? Explicit knowledge, by definition, is fairly stable because it is capturable by definition. Okay, we may not have captured it all, but by definition, it's capturable. And so if it's capturable, it's relatively stable. It's like the recipes in a cookbook. I can read an entire cookbook. That doesn't necessarily make me a chef. Okay? And so they're there. Is that what we're worried about with social networking technologies? It's kind of interesting because when we look at the flip side, the tacit knowledge, tacit, volatile. By definition, it exists only in people. Okay, you can learn around it, you can learn kind of with it, you can re-experience it and hear it in stories, but you're going to develop your own tacit knowledge. As soon as it's explicit, it's explicit. It stops being tacit. And so tacit is very volatile. It is like the knack of a master chef. Here's a really cool thing. If I run a 5-star restaurant, and my master chef, she writes a recipe book with all of her recipes in it, and it's published, you think my business will go down or up? It goes up. So we're not worried about the explicit knowledge destroying, because we know that well beyond that, there's the tacit knowledge of the five-star chef in the back. And so what are we worried about with the social networking technology? Are we really worried about the loss of explicit knowledge? Are we worried about its sharing? And when we worry about tacit knowledge, well, heck, it's pretty hard to get tacit knowledge on anything. It's tacit, for heaven's sakes. It only exists in the person you can hug. What's the social risk? I work primarily with really conservative nerds in the engineering profession. And they, their profession in the power industry and all, they're not too worried about the folks in the world buying cosmetics. They're not too worried about the folks in the world teaching second graders. They're not too worried about the folks in the world saving the whales, usually, okay? They're not too worried about them because that's not part of their society. They don't consider that part of their social. And so what I challenge each of you is you have to define who your social is that you care about. Otherwise, you're trying to cure the planet, for heaven's sakes. That's kind of big. Leave that to Zeus with his anger management issues. All righty? So who is a social? Social, first off, is your stakeholders. I purposely hyphenate that word because remember, they hold the stake that everything you have is at stake with. All right? My master chef, she holds the stake of my five-star restaurant. They are critical. I love putting stockholders in there because we usually think, oh yeah, they provide the financial stake. No, they also provide the tacit knowledge of believing how good we'll be somewhere down the road. That's why they sunk their money into it. They're big holders of tacit knowledge. If we think of stakeholders, we also have to look with us and around us. So I think of the stakeholders as the folks in the car with me. Alrighty, they're reading the map in the car next to me, they're bringing the lunch in the car seat behind me, so they're all in my car. When I look out the window, there's other cars that I might be following, or I'm drafting behind, or whatever. Those are the collaborators with me on the journey. We're all on the same highway, and then there's folks trying to cut me off. Now, I'm sure that doesn't happen on California highways, and they're trying to, beat me to my destination so they can deliver a destination before I can, and those are my competitors. But essentially, we're all on the same highway of knowledge. Same knowledge highway, I guess would be a better way to say that, okay? And so it's the same critical knowledge. And then lastly, we cannot forget, we have the folks for whom we're making the journey, the customers, okay? And they are essentially the consumers of the critical knowledge. So the first thing you probably want to do is make your list of who the heck your social is. And I would say you better start with your stakeholders. Then think about the folks that you're working arm in arm with, and the folks who are waiting to take your arms off, your collaborators and your competitors. And then move to your customers. I tend to be swayed very heavily by the thinkings of Dr. Deming, okay? I'm very swayed by the examples of folks like Bill Gore, the founder and the first president of Gore Industries, and by companies like Southwest Airlines. So to put that into context, yesterday I heard just a teeny-weeny part of the conversation in a topic. Mark, what was yesterday's topic? It had something to do with making money in a downturn economy or something. And one guy said, remember, business is about making money. Well, I'm not really sure I believe that. I think that's half of a statement. Bill Gore says the purpose of a business is to make money and have fun. One's necessary, the other's important. And I subscribe to that philosophy. And so I just wanted to let you know where I'm going to lead. So what we need to do is say, hey, if the knowledge is really in certain people, and I have key processes that deliver my products, I better know what the key knowledge is behind there. And the metaphor I'm going to use is a keystone because it makes for a handy metaphor. Because what's our business? Our business is that we bridge the gap between customer needs and customer satisfaction, correct? Isn't that what we're in the business doing? We're bridging that gap. And we bridge that gap by taking all the knowledge bricks of our stakeholders and our collaborators, and we bridge that gap. And we know that somewhere right in the crux of this bridge is a very important piece called a keystone. It is the most critical part. Tons of civilization based on the invention of a keystone. You pull that one out, boom, you're going to fall down. Because what's always cracking you on the head is your competitive pressure. And so you better know which blocks of your knowledge are actually the keystone blocks. That's your knowledge with your social put together. Now you know the who and the critical part. And so when you look at that picture, you're going to better identify in that keystone whether or not your keystone knowledge is explicit. If your keystone knowledge is explicit, and by that you'd be like a knowing company, like McDonald's, like the delivery systems in a Disney theme park maybe, where they have very beautiful, well-honed processes that are so wonderful that they're able to repeat them with great success over and over. But the people who are repeating them are well trained in a very explicit procedure to follow it out. And so as a result, McDonald's, I'm guessing, doesn't worry a whole lot when one of the people who was doing burgers in their kitchen leaves with the way to do McDonald's burgers, because they know that's explicit knowledge for them. Their burger flipper is not the master chef, it's somebody working in the process. So it's stable, it's highly shareable. And I would say that's the term you'd use managing for, as opposed to your tacit knowledge. It's stuck inside the head of a person who wants to connect, create, and contribute, and it's volatile. It's only delicately shareable, because we're not even sure the processes by which it's shared. Dave talks about the storytelling, talks about the art of storytelling, not the science of storytelling. Okay? And so it's got to be nurtured and guided. Okay? Notice he uses a grandparent analogy, not a mean teacher analogy. Okay? Because he talks about the trust. And when you read books by like Kruzak, one of the big names in the field, he says, hey, knowledge, if it's an asset, it's got to move. The only way it moves is with trust. That's the collateral on which it's moved. And so it's a completely different keystone. Say, well, do this. How do I know how to work? And I'm just going to give you briefly a very noisy slide here, but I'll tell you where to find it. I stole this information from Nelson Bowles' book, What Color Is My Parachute? Because in all the things I've read, he did the most beautiful job of basically putting on one page everything everybody does. And what he did was he said, hey, you know what? Your people, you are either working with things, working with data, working with processes, or working with people. So kind of moving from left to right, you're going from a logical linear type of job all the way over to basically a holistic, nonlinear relational kind of job. And then he says, and you're either in a job that's highly prescribed, okay, people tell you what to do, to a job that's highly discretionary. And I love this because you can slap this piece of paper up and map out the organizations or the departments that you're worried about and that you want to build a knowledge management strategy around and figure out how to do the networking technologies and map them onto it, because this very quickly tells you a borderline between explicit and knowledge. And so the story I told you about, if I'm following a procedure to make hamburgers, I'm down here, I'm tending, I'm measuring, I'm serving, okay? Highly prescribed jobs across the board. And what I have down there, essentially, is the pile of things that predominantly rely on explicit knowledge to make them work. Okay? They're highly defined. As opposed to the top, where when I work with project management teams, that's a lot of negotiating and improving and innovating and synthesizing. It's the work of business management. All up there in the top, that's tacit knowledge. All the way over, notice that it's not just on the right. If I run a painting business and I'll paint your ceiling, there's a big difference between if I'm using a guy who's using a roller or one of my workers' name is Michelangelo. Okay? That would be quite a different ceiling. And that's a lot of tacit knowledge. Not everyone can paint the Sistine Chapel. And so what I like about this is it very quickly gives you one piece of paper. You can just X off. Here's where we are. Gee whiz, I'm relying on tacit knowledge. Gee whiz, I'm relying on tacit knowledge. I got to hug the person, not the wires. Last part, if you're doing that, and if you're in the field of tacit knowledge, I would highly recommend you remember this picture. This picture is a pictorial of the most reprinted Harvard Business Review article of all time, published way back in 1968 by Frederick Herzberg. One more time, how do you motivate employees? And it is critical to understanding where we're going. Because what he said was, those things like that big salary and that great office and that great view and that great health plan? All you did was minimally dissatisfy someone and said, okay, I'll come work with you. But really the reason they signed up was because you gave them the promise that they'd be able to connect, create, and contribute. And that's what motivates people. And that the best you can do here is minimally dissatisfied with all those extrinsic ones, but you can definitely tap the talent of Michelangelo on the upper one. And so what you want to do is look at, when I am looking at my social networking technologies, what am I doing to get up here? Or all am I doing is, well, people didn't read the newsletter. I'll put it on the web for you. All you did was move it here. Okay? There's a big difference in where you want to move it. Tacit knowledge, up there. Because you saw the emotions, the fundamental emotions that were listed in Groundswell. It's the altruistic impulse, the validation impulse, the affinity impulse. Okay? You want to tap those. See, that's cute theory, Paul. Does it really work? Does that really work? So I said, let's do the same test that Burnoff and Lee do in their book. I'll go if your Keystone knowledge is tacit, you now know that if you tick somebody off and you see evidence that they're going here, the same nonlinear effect, they're going out the door. Your master chef is working for someone else. Okay? And there's her leaving the cookbook behind is not going to help you. Okay? So it doesn't really work. So I did the same test. I told you about the thing with the Comcast. So he said, hey, I put Comcast into a search, see what the first video is. So I got a list of the best companies to work for in America. The ones that people say, these are the best companies to work for. And always, toward the top of that list, in the top 5, is Gore Industries. That's one of the reasons. So I stick in Gore text. Okay? What do I get? There's a ton of videos of people doing free product testing for Gore. So they're standing in front of tidal waves, testing their Gore-Tex jacket. All right? I think that's pretty cool. Maybe that's just coincidence. So I stick in Southwest Airlines. Top video. Funny Stewart singing all that road stuff that you always hear. He's doing it to a rap. Okay? About putting your seatbelts on, using a credit card to buy the drinks. He's got the people on the airplane clapping and stomping. Wow, is that coincidence? I don't know what he is. The next 2 down. Inspirational ones on why you want to jump in a certain airplane. That's pretty cool. Zappos. Again, in the top 25 companies to work for. Top video on there, how crazy it is in the office. And all the people partying and wearing funny glasses. Again, you read it, you're splitting your sides. It's like, is that coincidence? I don't know. Every data point I'm doing is triggering on that wire. So apparently the folks had said, first, let's hug the knowledge owners instead of the technology, funnily enough, is reflected in my minimal search. Now granted, one of the ones on the top of the list, Booz Allen Hamilton, a consulting firm in the Beltway, you just find nerdy things about consulting stuff, okay? So it's not 100% hit, all right? I happen to get on the on-ramp at Pittsburgh. We don't use the word the, but if we did, it would be on the 79 in Pittsburgh. And right there at the on-ramp is a company that's in the top 10 called Development Dimensions International. That name's too long. The search engine bombed out on that one, so it didn't like that one. So there we go. So that's our inside. Now let's talk about the folks that are on the highway with us, our customers and collaborators. This is pretty obvious stuff, and I think Jim, correct me if I'm wrong here as I go through this, but I believe Jim's going to talk about, hey, we all know this is an obvious curve. The more we grow in our knowledge, the more we're going to have the capability to delight the customer. Anybody disagree with that? Okay, smarter is usually better. All right? And what we'll find is that if we have a way of using the social networking technologies to help our collaborators be on board with us, basically we're either drafting with them or they're drafting on us, we're going to be able to drive that curve a little sharper. Is that your story, Jim? I believe so. Remember, he's cleanup hitter late in the day today. I'm giving you a little teaser for him. We also know the flip side to this, that if the social networking technologies, if for some reason our explicit knowledge is, like the recipe to Coca-Cola or something, got out the door, we basically lose capability to delight the customer. So anything in terms of knowledge loss we know is dangerous. But I'd also like to emphasize the idea of stale knowledge. So if we can use the technologies to keep our knowledge fresh, that might be a very powerful insight. Because what are our competitors always doing? Our competitors, they're always raising the bar. And so that intersection point, always moving to the right. Okay? And so we know that basically knowledge standing still is the same as stale knowledge. Bad news. Okay? So that's a pretty easy curve to see. So we want a strategy that's going to help us capitalize on the collaborators. We also want a technology that we can peek and see where in the world the bar is being raised. All righty. Okay. Just gotta. Okay. I'm gonna customer satisfaction, again the same curve. And so what I want to do is jump to a really quick outline on how we want to strategize it. My advice, you want to be Epimethean and Promethean. okay? You want to create a social strategy that boosts your knowledge networking, okay? And by that, and I apologize, it's really fun, okay? So we want to be able to boost that. There's a good article by Sean Silverthorne in HBS on that. And then, after you figure out the social strategy, complement it with the social media. And essentially what that will really boil down to, Strategic Planning 101, is you're going to look for being able to motivate stakeholders, keeping the collaborators close, and basically being able to delight your customers. And so when you're talking about tacit knowledge, you're talking about delighting it. Explicit knowledge, you're talking about protecting it. Okay? You want to look inside the car to find your strengths and your weaknesses. You want to look around the car to find your opportunities and your threats. And so when you look at a strategy, you want to make sure that your social networking strategy is building a capability for these folks to connect, create, and collaborate. I have a quick question for Mark. Is he here? I assume these notes are going to be published later. Okay. Okay. So you don't have to worry about jotting this all down. I see people, their smoke is blazing off their fingertips. Essentially, to motivate the stakeholders, what are you talking about? You want to use social networking for what I would call excitement opportunities. If you're doing it to fix a pothole, you're just working on that bottom curve of the Herzberg curve. Okay. You also, on the bottom curve, the nice thing about social networking technology is it gives you a free look at the graffiti in the bathroom. You can find out who's ready to leave, okay? Similarly with the collaborators, you want to keep them close. Jim, I believe that's your talk later in the day, okay? I'm really setting them up. I'm worried that they might leave early. So, the same with the customers. You want to, you look at another great company to work for, it's on the list, Wegmans, it's a grocery store chain in the Northeast. And they actually use social networking. When you look at their hit, top videos that show up, how to cook with our food. What a great thing for a food store company. Second top hit, how to work for us. It gives you a whole rundown on how to pass the interview. Is that cool or what? So here's the final knowledge share. Final knowledge share is, you do want to look at what's emerging from the box. You better define it for yourself. Okay, I showed you how I defined it, the way to think about that. So you want to look at what's emerging, but really, to work on what you need to work on, you want to think inside the urn. You think outside the box, that's half the equation. You want to think inside the urn. Okay? Now what's cool is Marcy's going to come up next, and she's going to talk about some strategies and the culture that they had to use at MITRE to put it in. And some cynics are saying to me that, you can run around and develop strategies for your whole life, but you know what, Paul? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, let's flip that around. If culture eats strategy for breakfast, then I say let's make that strategy nutritious and delicious, because you are what you eat. And by nutritious, that's Promethean. It's looking ahead. What good's that going to do for us? By delicious, you see that in the moment. So it's got to be delicious in order for it to be nutritious. You're going to act in the moment. So your strategy better be Epimethean and Promethean. That's my story. I think we've got some great case studies that you'll be able to think about in this context with Marcy, Virginia, and Jim. Any questions?
I have a question.
Please.
Since you're in Greek mythology, is Sisyphus the primary cynic of rolling the hill up so that knowledge keeps us eternally?
No, so he has a Sisyphus as the primary cynic. No, Sisyphus is a metaphor for lifetime employment.
He's the ultimate optimist.
Mm-hmm. The ultimate optimist. Yes, sir.
You talked a couple of times about looking linearly ahead where technology is actually at an exponential curve. I think something a lot of companies struggle with. Is
That's a trick.
Okay.
We wanted to see if you noticed.
All right, there we go. Better? Okay. I think something a lot of companies struggle with is the ability to understand an end state. Social networking and the knowledge management stuff is kind of hot, but there's a question about where are we actually going. You're implementing it to sound good, but you don't know what your end state and what you're trying to evolve into looks like. Can you speak at all to how to handle that challenge if people are trying to evolve their strategies without understanding where this stuff is all going? It becomes a struggle to actually get it sold in the first place.
Well, that's the cool thing, is that if you put your strategy as in the article that Silverthorne wrote, basically Nikolaj, I can't remember his last name. If you take your eyes off of and say, okay, the technology will be what the technology is. Paul Revere used the technology that he had to get the groundswell he needed. But if you center your strategy around your social, you know that, right? You center that social around your key business processes, you know that. And if those key business processes have key tacit knowledge, you know that. And so now it's not a question of worrying about the impact. It's saying, now that I know this, and here's the technology today, and if I can capitalize it on here to get people to be able to allow people, I should say not get them, because they're going to automatically do this. Okay, the best thing, what we usually do is take away their motivation to do it. They're automatic, they come wired to want to connect, create, and contribute. And so you're always asking your question, you know that you'll be at least being able to ride that curve up. You're no longer worried about mispredicting the end state. You're preparing for the journey up rather than saying, if I'm here, what am I going to do when I'm there? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other? Okay. So Mike would like to be, oh, great. All righty, fire away.
The game and collaboration, it's the benefit is also the threat. And it's what's-
Oh, great point. He says, in collaboration, the benefit is also a threat. And so in essence, the hope left in the jar and what's emerging from the jar are two sides of the same sword. And I think, Jim, again, I said, Jeff, you talked about something about that. Marcy, you talking about that also? Where'd Marcy go? Yes, we'll be in suspense on that one. What I like is this approach allows you to say, gee whiz, the tacit knowledge, if I have a strategy to protect it, that's all like an explicit management type of technology around or an approach on something that's tacit, I'm probably missing the mark because I hug tacit knowledge. I'm worried about explicit, then it's going out. Now you're worried about the same thing as the validation key. Say, well, gee whiz, that is a wires and bandwidth answer. And so you have to, it's two sides of the sword. If you sharpen one way, you sharpen the other way.
So the trust that we use to achieve this is got to extend through the technology that enables the benefit.
That's an awesome point. I actually didn't make that. What he said is then the trust that we use that enables stories to be powerful, that trust has to be somehow transmissible via the technology. If it's not, then the trust is missing. Going back to what Dave said, then it's just noise on the wall. Okay, and my guess is the woman who saw 500 tweets, 499, she wasn't sure who the people were. They looked out of context, but if she had seen something from her long lost lover, she might have read that a little deeper. So.
I'll talk to you afterwards.
There was a reason she had hoped he'd stay lost. I think that's part of it.
No, actually, I'd like to be able to find the guy.
Oh, okay. Right now, he's tacit knowledge. Okay, I think, any other questions, please? All right.
What about the gas crowd call?